Disruptive FM is brought to you by Branding Strategy Insider. Read all about branding in the 21st century and how to adapt in an era of disruption. Check out brandingstrategyinsider.com. If you've ever gotten into a strategic conversation, do you lay out a concrete agenda? Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, Step 4. Or do you imagine multiple scenarios? What if? Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Hey, wait a minute. Isn't disruptive FM an oxymoron? What is so disruptive about frequency modulation in the first place? Well, a lot, actually, if we reimagine its purpose. Disruptive FM was started on the concept of thinking more imaginatively about marketing. What does it mean beyond all the silly buzzwords? Digital transformation. And how do we connect more with people? It's humans, after all, that we're trying to reach until the arrival of our robot overlords. This is Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Co-hosted by myself, Geoffrey Cologne, a senior marketing communications designer at Microsoft.
Disrupt the system, jam the transmission.
And Cheryl Metzger, strategy director at Wirestone. Both of us proud Ogilvy alumni. Don't think of this podcast as us talking at you. Rather, us talking with you. Let's begin the dialogue. It's been a long time, but we're back. Disruptive FM. I am your co-host, Geoffrey Cologne.
And I'm Cheryl Barbie.
Oh my goodness, wait a second. There's a stranger on the other end. Cheryl Barbie. What happened since the last time we've been on this podcast?
Yes, well, I got married, so I've upgraded my last name from Metzger to Barbie. But anyone who's following the podcast can still follow me at The Real Cheryl Metzger. So you can still find me at both names. But yes, I'm now Cheryl Barbie. My last name starts much closer to the beginning of the alphabet, which I'm pretty excited about.
Awesome. So we want to talk about three big things for 2018 for the listeners, just to get them to think about what we could see this year. Not really trends as much as, things that are really happening around us in terms of behavior. And one that you and I talk a lot about, because you took this action. You're no longer on Facebook, so we got to bring this up.
Yeah.
And, Mark Zuckerberg today said in his New Year's resolution, he's going to fix Facebook, which is what a CEO should be doing. That should not necessarily be a resolution, but I digress. What's going to happen to Big Social in 2018? I mean, is it... Are we sort of at a tipping point where it's not important anymore?
I don't know if it's that it's not important. Interestingly, whenever you see populist movements spring up, whether they're good populist movements or whether they're bad populist movements, it does seem like social media still has an interesting role to play in disseminating information and organizing people. But I do think there's a tipping point of sorts where, one of the things you and I've talked about a lot is, people have been kind of chasing technology for the last, I would say 20, 25 years. Everything that's new, people just want to adopt, and it disrupts our whole lives. It disrupts business models. It disrupts social structures. It disrupts how we communicate with one another. Social media is, of course, one of the big disruptors in there. And I think we're finally reaching a point where we're seeing enough negative consequences where people are saying, is this really helping us? Is this good for us? And I think one of the things that occurred to me actually when I was thinking about this is it's almost like our social media sites are the 7 deadly sins. They're in different sites. You could kind of have fun figuring out which one aligns to which deadly sin. But I feel like Facebook for me really connects with sloth, because it's made us very lazy.
Yes.
Made people lazy thinkers. It's made people lazy about the friendships that they cultivate and who they let into their lives. It's made people lazy about guarding personal information with care. It's made people lazy about communicating and reaching out. I think of apps like Tinder as being lust, and 7 deadly sins. I think of Twitter as being wrath. You and I were talking about how it's become such an abusive platform. It's sort of like, if you're not trolling someone, you're not doing Twitter right these days. And I feel like the shortness of the medium has really encouraged people to just be really and just try and go for the retweet, and that usually leads people to being really offensive, and it stopped any like positive dialogue from happening. I think of Instagram as kind of being pride, because it's really encouraged a whole generation of young people to focus on vanity. See all these young people whose accounts are just one endless selfie after the next, or you see these so-called influencers where they're just posting pictures of their body, but then they put some sort of inspirational quote underneath it as if it's not just about their body. Or look at Pinterest. I feel like you could say that that's envy, because you kind of want everything to look like it's Pinterest worthy in your life. So anyhow, all of that is to say, I feel like social media has, by its engineering, really brought forward our basest instincts and doesn't lift us up. And I think people are turning away from that. I know I turned away from Facebook because I found it to be increasingly toxic, and I felt like the relationships that I had there, the friends that I had, people stopped seeing each other as multidimensional humans, and they started seeing each other in this two-dimensional, posts, especially when it comes to politics. There was no more engagement around, or there was no more consideration for the fact that the person you're talking to on the other end is a person and not a profile picture.
Yeah.
I know you and I both have been really active on social media. Are you thinking of turning away from Facebook, or do you feel like there's some hope that it and other platforms can kind of have a rebirth or new sources of value?
It's interesting. I've only retained my account, and I am not very active at all. I maybe only post like once a week, and I used to post almost like 4 or 5 times a day. So to go to like once a week is really low, especially on Facebook. I think what's happened is I have retained it mainly because if I have to run an ad campaign for a client or business, I need to have an account, because obviously they tie any of their ads manager into having an account. So that's the only reason I haven't gotten rid of it. But I don't miss it. I feel like it's, now the worst internet forum you can find. Mm-hmm. And it's just filled with lots of just abuse. And even though people are connected, I also feel what's happened is you're just seeing mainly the people that, you connect with regularly all the time. You're not really seeing any contrarian views. You're not seeing anything really different. And it's almost like reconfirming your bias. And I feel much better just not being on the platform. I feel, I can do deeper work. I can read a book. I can go meet people. I can work out more, whatever it might be. I feel like I'm just not tied to looking at a screen all the time. And I feel like there's a big movement now toward people just, trying to get away from looking at their screens all the time. I mean, I think there was something that even Jack Dorsey of Twitter just recently said that he took a 10-day break from even being online. I mean, so you even have these people who created the platforms realizing maybe there's just, this isn't what we're meant to be, to do. We're not meant to be fixated on screens all the time.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that, because, I know one of the things we talk about a lot is marketing, branding. And in the marketing world, I still hear and see articles all the time where people talk about video is king. Everything should be video. And every brand wants to have tons of video spewing forth. And to me, that's like the dying gasp of content marketing. And the idea that you just need to be producing all content. And one of the things that strikes me, not to say that video will suddenly become irrelevant, but I do agree. I think we're moving away from visual everything. I think we're moving away from the dominance of screens towards, people don't want to look at a screen as much as they want to look at a person. And I think we're moving away from visual interfaces to invisible interfaces. One of the things you've been a big proponent of is sound as content, music as content. And I think one of the reasons that's powerful is because it's not visual. It's stimulating a different sense. And I think, moving away from the content in general towards interactions that feel seamless, that feel invisible. You wave a hand or you speak with your voice, or, the biometric security measures. You see, like, for instance, the iPhone 10, how it unlocks just by your face looking at it. That's the kind of invisible interface that we're going to see more and more of. And I think as that becomes, not just next year, but in the next 5 years or so, as that becomes really prevalent, I think all of that screen-based visual focus that we've had in the last 15 years is going to get diminished increasingly. And again, not to say that it goes away, because we're visual creatures. We like photos, we like paintings, we like videos. But I definitely think there's an exhaustion that people have reached with it. And I think brands and marketers would do well to think beyond visual stimulus and think more about interactions and think more about seamlessness. And actually, coming back to your Facebook point, one of the things that struck me is I remember learning in sociology back in college that in terms of group psychology, you value your membership in a group when it's harder to become a group. And Facebook has so cheapened group membership. And I don't just mean in a group, but in terms of relationships.
Yes.
People connect for the oddest and most superficial reasons, and then you're considered a friend. And to me, I feel like that's cheapened friendship, that's cheapened relationships, because there's no effort, there's no time spent there's no currency. Like, the currency of a relationship has been so devalued by the ability to just sort of add random acquaintances on Facebook and other social platforms, that I think that's part of the diminishing of our social structures that social media has played a role in. And I think that's why people are moving away from those types of experiences, because when relationships are cheapened, when experiences are cheapened, I think people aren't feeling good about that. So I definitely think moving away from that heavy emphasis on video and that quick trying to catch people's eyeballs, and consider that a positive interaction.
So while we move away from screens on social media, this is interesting. We're moving more towards screens when it comes to shopping and retail. And Sears, Macy's just announced more store closures. Physical retail really having, problems this year. This year we're in right now, 2018. There's a wager, I think, from some analysts that you're going to see a lot of bankruptcies, a lot of Chapter 11 filings on behalf of retail stores. What's happening here? What's going on that's causing, people to basically say, I'm going to do more things online, or is it more detailed or more in depth than that? What's happening in that space that's really causing so much turbulence in terms of, malls going out of business, stores going out of business, just less of us, doing shopping in sort of a physical format?
Yeah. Well, I think it's such an interesting topic. I know you have a lot of thoughts on it as well. I think for me, I see it as a combination of both human behavior changing and not in a good way. And I'll talk about that in a second. And I also think of it as a lot of retailers not reimagining the retail experience sufficiently. Because I think you're right. I think a lot of them think like, oh, technology is the answer. I just need to put some cool screens in, or maybe have some AR, and then people will want to come and be in store.
Yeah.
In terms of human behavior changing, the 7 deadly sins keeps coming back. The idea of sloth. I think we now, because of technology, we're all guilty of this. Although maybe it's not guilty, but just natural. But we now don't like to get up and go anywhere, and we want everything to be delivered to us. We want everything to be instant. so that, diminishes our desire to get into the car and drive down the street and go to the store with that guarantee that you're going to find what you need, or that it'll be at the best price. On the flip side, though, I do hear people, I was actually just interviewing some people today, I do hear some people who, depending on the product, they really want that tangible experience. For instance, you're buying paint. Paint, there are a lot of things you could do digitally to inspire paint decisions or, to give people an idea of what they need. At the end of the day, you need to see it with your own eyes, and you need to see it in a physical environment. And clothes, a lot of times you want to try those on your body because you just don't get a sense of how they're going to fit online. So I think there's still some incentives that people are driven by to go into a store. So I think that's on the human behavior side, that you're just seeing people go out for things less, though there are still some exceptions where they feel a need to physical interaction with it. On the retailer side, though, one of the things that strikes me is I think retailers, much like a lot of brands and marketers, have been duped by this idea that digital transformation is all that it requires. I feel like digital transformation was the big hype for a long time. Then customer experience, which is really the output of the well-executed digital transformation, that was the big topic of conversation. I still think both are important, but I actually think what's most important is human transformation. And what I mean by that is, how do you rethink experiences to say, is this good for people? Does this help people? Is this what people naturally want and need? If a retailer asked themselves that question, I think they would naturally turn more towards services, discovering and delighting people. How can you provide services that kind of surround the product that they would sell? How do you think of new ways to connect people or to teach people or to excite people or get them to discover something they wouldn't have discovered on their own in the store? And if the stores become places where you can brainstorm with other people, where you can discover something you never would have seen before, where you can get a service or, contact an expert in a way that you wouldn't be able to get online, now you have a reason to get up and go there. So I think more retailers should ask themselves, is this good for people? But what is your experience recently with retail? Do you actually find yourself going out to stores?
I mean, I think the interesting thing you brought up is the fact that I still go to stores, but I don't go to the ones that, like you said, I go to the ones where I feel like I can get information from someone who might be an expert and might be able to talk a little bit more about a particular item, or I may be able to try something on because, as we know, clothing, accessories, things of that nature, no matter how far we want to take, well, you can try this on with AR, people still like to try things on to see how they'll look, because we're not at that point yet where AR is really going to be able to enable the retail experience. Will it move that direction? Yes, but I don't think it's there for a lot of people just yet. And I like the boutique niche experience. I think that's what will last for the next couple of years, because it is more personable. It is more about the customer experience. It's unique and it's interesting. These sort of big box retailers, I think the reason they've struggled so much is because you can get that online. You can get a lot of those things online. You don't necessarily have to go out to a big store with lots of people with tons of inventory. I mean, that's where I think Chris Anderson's theory on the long tail, has hurt those big box retailers. But I think if you're a niche, like I use Warby Parker as an example, you can't buy any of their glasses at a boutique. They have tons of boutiques, but the boutiques act as a place where you can actually try everything on, and then you can just order online from the store or from your phone, and then the glasses come with you knowing like, oh, I already tried these on, and I like the way that they look, and I was able to talk to all the people who were in the boutique. So I think digital companies realize physical is important because of that human touch, as you noted, Cheryl. But I think what's happened is the physical retailers themselves who are struggling thought, oh, we'll just bolt on digital, and really haven't looked at the term that I love that you used, human transformation, how they really could have transformed their whole organization rather than just bolting on a bunch of digital sort of solutions.
Well, and that's kind of the change that I think we're going to see is what you just described is the mindset of chasing technology still. It's like, oh, well, we need to be more like digital technology. We need to throw some of that in our store. And retailers have competed on the same points as online retailers. And that I think is the critical misstep is they're trying to compete on a transactional level with what online does best, which is give you price variety and selection, gives you speed, instantaneous delivery, things like that. You don't have to wait in line for anything. And I feel like retailers, instead of trying to focus on beating online transactions at what they do best, they should instead, like you said, embrace the physical element of the store and say, okay, how do we actually enhance things that are innate to the human experience, like touch, like sight, smell, sound? How to create experiences where we can bring people together, where that boutique store becomes a meeting place or a town hall. We've seen that success with places like Starbucks. And I think retailers really do have an opportunity to think about how they can compete with online by not trying to be like online, and really enhancing the physical experience of being in the store and the human experience of being in the store. And that actually, the idea of human transformation is something I've been thinking about a lot because it ties into so much else going on. You and I also always like to talk about politics. And one of the things that I think is interesting is with the recent tax initiative that has been very controversial, one of the things that strikes me is whether people like it or not, a lot of big corporations have put forward a story of how they're actually going to reward their people. Now, again, you can be skeptical about whether they're going to do that or not. But to me, that signals a larger trend where instead of automation and outsourcing being the words of the day in corporate America, now it's really, what are you doing for your employees? What are you doing for your people? And how are you treating your customers? And the more you see people, whether they're posturing or whether they're sincere, we're seeing that need to think about people first emerge in corporate America. And I think that is a response to everything being so tech focused. Yes. That we've lost sense of the people who fuel the jobs, who are part of the fabric of our society. And I think it's a pushback to say, you know what? Let's stop talking about making everything automated and outsourced. Let's start thinking a little bit more about the people in our communities who are part of these companies. So I think human transformation at a corporate America level means putting people first and not process first. And I think that's a shift we're going to start to see slowly over time. I think in a marketing world, it means thinking about physical and human experiences instead of digital first experiences. I think you had turned me onto the book Revenge of the Analog, and I actually just saw your post today from the New York Times about why a paper scheduler or planning book is better than a digital one.
Yes, and I still use one at work. I do not schedule things in my calendar like using my computer. I use a notebook.
Yeah, well, and I think you're seeing that more. And I actually just saw not too long ago that there was some research in terms of college students. They forced a certain group of college students to do a class where they took notes by hand, and they compared that in terms of their retention to students who use their laptops. And unsurprisingly, the students who had to write down their notes remembered the information a lot better because we're human at the end of the day.
Yes.
And we process information better when we have to translate it from our ears to our hands. So we're just seeing more and more all over the place this return to, or at least a recognition of the fact that our human instincts and the things that make us human have been neglected in this kind of race to chase digital. And I think at multiple levels, we're going to see people kind of taking a step back and saying, we might need to refocus on tangible things, physical things, emotional connections, people instead of products and processes. And, as we're saying, that can translate into a service mindset, that can translate into user experience being highlighted more in corporate America, which I think it is. I think it's something where brands have to think more about, what their values are and whether they're good stewards of those values. So it translates into a lot of different things. But anyhow, that's kind of my theme for the next couple of years, I think, is that human transformation.
So final minute here.
Yeah.
In terms of your theme of human transformation, do you think the overall theme for 2018, because this was one of my predictions too, is that we move more toward a slow social or slow communication movement? Are we going to see sort of an opposite of, hey, let's stop racing to this fictitious finish line? Do you see sort of more of a slow movement burgeoning?
Well, I would say yes and no. Interestingly, I do see more and more of my peers, and for anyone who doesn't know me, that means those of us on the cusp of millennial status. So I'm
Exennial.
late 30s.
Yeah, Zennial.
Yeah, the Zennials. I see a lot more people starting to really sour on Facebook in particular. So I do think that some people are starting to take some actions to turn away from certain technology, to slow down. I think there's been a lot of trauma in how accelerated and disrupted our whole world has been for a while. And I think people just can't process it. So yes, partially, I think we'll see in small pieces, people move away from some of the digital habits that they've built over the last couple of years. But no, in the sense that I think as we become more aware of how technology is affecting us negatively, we may have opportunities to improve its use and rethink its use. So I think there may, Mark Zuckerberg is going to fix Facebook. Well, who knows? Maybe he'll fix it in a way where it doesn't feel so toxic or it doesn't feel so manipulative. So it may be that there's a reawakening where we change our relationship with technology. Again, this kind of ties into human transformation. Instead of digital transforming us, we can transform digital. So I think that's a big opportunity in the next year. And I also think we'll continue to experience the disruption and acceleration that is so anxiety inducing. I think, we're still struggling to adapt to it. And I think that struggle will continue. But I'm hoping that, humans shaping digital instead of digital shaping us is going to be the path that we take in the next couple of years.
2018, a year of turbulence, a year of reawakening. Sounds like it's going to be pretty exciting.
You've been listening to an episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Rate and review the show on iTunes. Purchase a copy of Geoffrey's book, Disruptive Marketing, and follow us on Twitter at Disruptive FM. Signing off from the cities of Chicago and Seattle, press pause.
Disruptive FM is brought to you by Branding Strategy Insider. Read all about branding in the 21st century and how to adapt in an era of disruption. Check out brandingstrategyinsider.com.